Everyone knows that the 1960s were a crazy time for innovation, experimentation, and car racing, but no one really captured that spirit. Perhaps with more fervor than the Indy 500, the mid-1960s saw a slew of incredible inventions will take on the daunting challenge of competing in the Indianapolis 500 among the 33 cars that have dominated the event for over a century ago. A racing legend whose driving days were over, but whose ideas for such a vehicle lived on in the narrative of his inspired by the narrative of a fierce show leather racer's friendships and dreams of competing in the N500 driver, and what could be the last instance of an engineering project that was. Really created in a home garage in the rich and illustrious past, the late 1920s and early 1930s saw the birth of the protagonist, Al Stein, who was a member of that race small engine racing around California's brief 1-mile oval sparked an explosion in popularity. Popular with thrill-seeking drivers and onlookers who enjoyed the cheap tickets and enjoyed hammering them. Al Stein, a resident of Oakland, California, participated in the first ever really organized race in the Golden State in 1933. It didn't take long for Stein, who was intelligent, youthful, and gifted with fabrication skills, to be named champion. He won a slew of championships in California's short-track car racing contests. Over the years, 1935, 1936, 1937, his name was in. His articles and wins attracted such interest that he started constructing not only his own automobiles but also equipment for rivals who shared his goal of running at the head of the pack. His career went on for a long period, but in the late 1940s, Stein had matured, married, and seen the tragic loss of many friends to injury or death. He got out of his racing seat to pursue less intense pursuits. It's worth noting that his wife Patricia had, in addition to raising automobiles, she served as a promotional magnet for track owners who sported the powder puff look. When WWII rolled along, Patricia's name was almost synonymous with owls in the world of female racers' races. Stein was employed at a shipyard as a machinist, tool and die maker, and fabricator due to his talents in these areas. While fixing ships that would aid the Allies in winning the war, Stein uncovered a tiny tool and died. Enterprise, and he persisted in constructing automobiles for any client who strolled through the door requesting one. His success allowed him to recruit a young guy called Joe Hutcher as an assistant in the fabrication department, and he mentored this young man until to take him under his wing and show him the ropes of welding and fabrication, the way he viewed them must keep in mind fact during that era. The pinnacle of success for anybody who had participated in automobile races, constructed their own vehicles, or looked up to the daring racers that took on the world-famous speedway every May. Even after all this time had passed, Stein still carried these guilt feelings about with him. Over the years, he dreamed up designs for a number of vehicles that he believed could compete and win at that level. Stein wisely stashed up funds year after year, and here is where Stein's J. Idle, a friend and a great engineer with whom they had competed for many years, joins the narrative. Eitel has an intriguing position in American history. Both individuals resided in the Oakland region and were really good friends. The chairpicker, or bucket truck as it is more commonly known now, was created by this man. Vehicles that operate electricity and telephone wires on a daily basis. But in the beginning, the inspiration for Tell's design came from his experience picking cherries on the family farm, as the name implies. He came up with a self-propelled rig that could be handled by himself after becoming frustrated with the frequency of ladder moves. Easy-to-use hand controls let the guy to reach any desired height, allowing him to do whatever task he envisioned. Began selling his contraption in 1944 and gradually expanded his company until 1954. When he had success, the Bell Telephone Company hired him to construct a batch of these vehicles for its line workers, and Tell became a rich man overnight as a result of it. And many other enterprises in many industries did the same. He was probably jumping from one event to another as he traveled the nation promoting and expanding his company Idle. He did a lot of traveling across the nation, but every year he set aside time for himself to combine work and pleasure. It so happened that every May, there is an extended stay in Indianapolis for the N500 testing and qualifying. The truck chassis he purchased came from a variety of sources, including Allison Transmission of Indianapolis. Construct the cherry pickers on account of the fact that Allison always provided him with excellent access and all the passes he needed. Desired or required based on his own recollections, he was gushing to Stein about how great his Stein was prompted to beg to tag along after his experiences at the racetrack. In 1964, Eitel arranged for Stein to go along on the following trip, and he was pampered like a hog. On the way home from that excursion, Stein secretly committed the whole shooting match, including the garages, the drivers, and the whole situation. Anything to himself, intending to construct an independent vehicle nevertheless. Before proceeding, it is necessary to discuss the machinery of back in the day of the Indy 500, when the rear engine revolution was sweeping the speedway vehicles had in the early 1960s. Drivers like Mickey Thompson and others started to use their motors behind the wheel. One would not succeed until 1965, but it may be said that they ought to have done so in 1963 and 1964 as well. In 1965, however, headlines definitively portrayed the dinosaurs as the subject of Jim Clark's checkered flag. The conventional wisdom said that classic Indy roadsters had died off. However, there was a flaw in this reasoning. They couldn't say for sure how competitive or technologically advanced roadsters were. But the reality was that they are still striving to catch up to one another in terms of technology, since they were so popular for a long time. One tactic that many roadster drivers and owners used while competing with newer rear-engine automobiles: engine power, turbochargers, root blowers. And in one we will go into more detail on the vehicle soon. However, in this instance, a shaft turbine engine completely supplanted a piston engine. Due to their lack of fuel efficiency and dependability caused by their high horsepower, the roadsters were unable to compete with their contemporary rivals, being aware that Stein had other plans. His idea would revolve upon he and El overheard a rumor that year at Indy while perusing the garage's engines will show a maximum of 180 cubic inches. However, this was never implemented. El told Stein that if it happened, engines would be in high demand since the track conditions were poor. Has the capability to be significantly reduced in size from 255 or 270 cubic inches to hearsay circulated that the then current Formula One regulations, which permitted engines with a displacement of 3 liters, were the basis for this myth. The authorities' ultimate goal in trying to get more European teams to compete in the Indianapolis 500 was to have Eitel plant the realization that Porsche had compact 1.5-liter 4-cylinder engines capable of producing respectable power. These engines were almost unbreakable, and 2, the fact that each would produce precisely 180 cubic inches, or 3 liters, was enough to convince Stein. Upon seeing him again a few weeks or months later, Stein was visibly shocked, told El that he was planning to purchase 3 engines from Porsche instead of the 4 cylinders he had originally planned. Making an effort to acquire the recently released 6-cylinder 911 engines, which had been denied outright before he bought these Porsches, he went to a dealership and bought 3 brand new air-cooled flat 6 engines. Engine Steiner conferred with the German repair and racing business of Lux and Choron in California, which was at the forefront of Porsche performance at the time. The guys working there pleaded with him to make advantage of the 4-cylinder engines that were enticing due to their enhanced, despite Stein's warnings about the flat 6's age and engine size. He proceeded to install them nevertheless. Immediately to the Lux and Sherman store, which was quite close to Stein's own store in California, for after the improvements arrived, the compression was increased to 11.51, and the cylinders were boarded for even more heat. These flat 6's each had a displacement of over 2 liters, and the engines were overhauled from head to toe. It was anticipated that they would produce around 200 to 210 horsepower when run on methanol with a little amount of nitro. This was considered sufficient to qualify the vehicle for the Indianapolis 500. Recall the young man Stein employed at his store many years ago by the name of, after learning the ropes from Joe Haker, he went on to become one of the best racing minds in the nation. Was able to construct anything during the course of his decades-long career, and it was never dull. When we last saw Huffaker, he was at the helm of Kjell Kavala's BMC competition section. The brains behind as a result of bringing the BMC branding from England to the US, Huffaker would become a highly decorated race. Expert in engineering, automobile construction, and innovation, among other things. Yet, he was being summoned to do a favor for an elderly Huffaker. A friend and mentor agreed to construct the vehicle, but he put Stein's automobile ahead of his own. Additionally, he had finished building the specialties for the Indy 500 that included MG liquid suspension, and their priority was given to the real work tasks. Huffaker constructed the chassis according to Stein's specifications, but he failed to understand the idea. And he did a good job of making a product out of what seemed like miles of chromoid tubing, and it was a strange-looking component that had to have met rigorous requirements of construction since it had both engines and transaxles. It seems he didn't like staring at it either, so Stein had to go home and construct the automobile the moment it was finished. As for the racing team, Eitel and a group of gifted buddies formed the garage, and they were joined by other crew members. SKS Jones, Chief Byron Feldhacker, Bert, Troy, Ken, and Tom were all former champions. With Hines serving as main mechanic and Manning rounding out the group, they were sure to have some difficulties with this four-wheel drive vehicle's dual engines, such as connecting them to a single oil pipeline. Achieving correct hydraulic throttle setup on both transmissions with a single shifter simultaneously, as well as the several other chores that arise during the assembly of a unique racing vehicle that is unlike any other on the nowhere on this whole globe. Could you find an assembly manual or even an instruction pamphlet to assist you in putting this together? The rest of the crew of friends and volunteers put up long hours on evenings and weekends, and Stein gave his whole attention to JIT, had already discussed his worries about the car's weight with Al Stein, who was involved in its construction. Before setting off on yet another business trip, he proposed merging the two engines into a single transmission. After going through all, he returned to discover twice as much stuff on the vehicle, which was disappointing since he anticipated the load to be heavy, and it is already early winter, and he would soon discover how heavy it was. In 1966, when the Thrash was running behind schedule, the world received a tip about something they weren't aware of. Really anticipated the arrival of Bill Cheeseburg. As reported in the Arizona Daily Star on March 15, 1966, Bill Cheeseburg, a veteran from Tucson, and Brian 500 miler of the Phoenix Associated Press participating in the second annual Jimmy Bryan event in Phoenix, the 150 mile, is one of 7 recent entrants. The 30-year-old from Cheeseburg will be driving a 2-engine vehicle in the race scheduled for March 20th at Phoenix International Raceway for the optimum results in 4-wheel drive Porsches. One engine turns the front wheels while the other powers the back. In the 1958 Indy 500, he finished 10th. Carl Williams, Larry, and Cheeseburg were among his competitors. There could have been a few second looks at the car's short description given by Dixon, John Hollinsworth, and Gary Condon. Yet the focus of the headline was on the driver, Alan, who personally chose Bill Cheeseburg rather than the automobile itself. Cheeseburg was born and raised in Arizona. His rise to fame began when he became the youngest person to ever win a soapbox derby. During the course of his career in American racing, he was a journeyman who was neither the most decorated nor the most affectionately known as Cheese. Driver who dominated American racing in the 50s and 60s, rising up the ranks by a combination of hard work and determination in. He started out with jalopies and midgets, moved on to stock cars, and eventually started showing up in even more powerful machines. Starting in 1956 and continuing through 1968, on an annual basis at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway on occasion, Cheeseburg would try to compete in the Indianapolis 500, but he was always unsuccessful. Apart from a few occasions when he claimed to have lacked some excellent ideas, he is not often involved with high-level machinery. Brief period in 1957 when he qualified for the 33C car field at the racetrack and passed 17 vehicles on the first lap of, setting a record that is still in use today. The majority of the time, Cheeseburg would show up to the raceway without a specific mission or a fleet of vehicles till he drove several cars in an effort to qualify 9 times, according to documents, while attempting to get into the field in 1962 when he drove an Andy Granatelli Novi with a Mickey Thompson rear end, the vehicle powered by John Zink's turbine, the apparatus developed by Pierre Devil. And the MW Racing Roadster he qualified that year was the one he began in 27th place and finished 27th in 1961. In that year, he began 9th and ended 28th in his greatest vehicle ever, Al Dean's Dean Van Line Special. Additionally, I completed laps in a pioneering racetrack vehicle called the John Zink Track Burner Turbine Car. Either his vehicle failed to qualify, or he finished last in 1958 while piloting the infamous and unpredictable Novi, or he 10th. Then why was Cheeseburg selected to pilot this vehicle? In my view, it was because of his extensive. He had a great time responsibly driving unique and unusual automobiles around the track, even if he wasn't the quickest. Cheeseburg maintained a great reputation and was trusted by many with their equipment. He was so cautious in qualifying for the Indianapolis 500's that he avoided doing anything that may have put him out of the race, as we'll see. He had no qualms about jumping into multiples or long shots in 1966, and he always gave it his all. Although this vehicle may not have been prepared for the Phoenix race that was reported in the press, it was certainly ready to make headlines. a title that was formally announced in a National Associated Press report that published on April 6, 1966. California's Al Stein has assembled a two-engine vehicle that will fulfill a lifelong goal. Automobile that Stein has sketched and that will compete in the Indianapolis 500M for the first time in 20 years with two engines. Had a 15-year fantasy of competing in and winning the Memorial Day Classic on Sunday, he realized part of that desire, announced his intention to sell his $30,000 racer, and pays the $1,300 registration fee on the same day. LAO got behind the wheel of a two-engine Hauser for its first voyage out of the family garage, and it fractured a crankshaft in the engine in 1946, as it was running second in the race after qualifying second. Stuck on lap 17 subtitle in the garage and slammed it into the wall. In a business that looks more like a house than a garage, 55-year-old Stein performs his work in the rear of his Suburban. Stein put up enough money to retire from his job creating tools, motivated by his ambition of winning at Indianapolis. I've been saving up for this automobile quotation for the last 15 years, and I started saving 10 years ago. Almost every spare penny and extra minute has gone into it. Imagining it and coming up with ideas, Stein remarked, "I've designed it all myself." After the design was greenlit, Joe Huffaker, who operates a production business for competitive motor racing for San Kelly Cavalli Stein, a sportsman from Francisco, brought it home and installed the gearboxes and engines in his garage. He took care of the metal and machine work himself. Driver Bill Cheeseburg of Cheeseburg had the body built elsewhere. An engineer named Jones, who is 38 years old and has competed in 6,500 Rs races, has consented to pilot the Stein Special Ski, for in the head of the 8-person team is an electronics company that Jones and Stein co-founded over 30 years ago when they were both competed in racing events. The vehicle's two upgraded 6-cylinder Porsche 911 engines produced around. They can each produce 215 horsepower and can spin at 9,000 RPM. Stein is hoping that the car's synchronized front and rear engines would propel it to the 4-wheel drive technology, which he calls Victory will supposedly let it run 5 meters per second quicker than any other vehicle on the course. Further entries. Please provide us with 5 miles to navigate those turns, and we will be satisfied. Stein notes in italics that he's referring to speeds of 150 mph while navigating the curves, as well as speeds over 190 mph on the straightaway, quote. And the national media really got into it when everyone could finally see who will be participating in the highly anticipated qualification race when the entry list was finalized. April 19th, the Indianapolis 500, and the morning cocoa beginning with Dick Ralston and ending with 500 entries in 1966, a passage from the tale that is sprinkled throughout. Starting about the midway point, there are 46 brand new races out of the 78 that competed. The highest since '84 and 1953. Vehicles, with the 500 set to begin on May 30th, with just the 33 quickest qualifiers. It's no secret that Ford and Offenhauser will be the unlucky owners of 13 brand new racing vehicles. Powering 78 vehicles, Ford engines will be mounted behind the seats of 33 Offenhauser vehicles, are attempting to qualify for the starting field, with 61 total entries, 15 non-supercharged and 13 supercharged. Motors, 17 available for the individualist to use, and what a collection of individuals there is. The Chevy engines that power the fifth-year vehicles are 2 6-cylinder and 5-speed units. We're missing an engine from their application form, and naturally, one of the surviving entrants has the crowd-pleasing noise beneath the fourth car. The hood will be piloted by the youthful Greg Weld this season. All 4 of these vehicles are deserving of particular recognition. The exhaust gases are used when Herb Porter gets into a vehicle that is powered by a turbocharged off-road engine. Instead of turning the blower using the engine's belt or gear drive, Harry Blum plans to attempt a supercharged Rambler 6 in his submission. Everyone is confused about what to do with this one. The only potential downside to Norm Demler's entry, a turbine, is that it may be a sleeper. The longest delay any power plant has ever seen between opening the throttle and the engine's response. Yet the IF engineers claim to have solved this issue. You should anticipate a vehicle with demonic acceleration. Albert Stein of Andalusia, California, wins for creativity. He designed a 2-engine vehicle. Remember El Phil's twin coach? It's an old concept at the Speedway. One person operates the front wheels and the other drives the back. In 1946, it was among the race's quickest vehicles that year, but it also had some of the worst handling. Features and driver Paul Russo sent it to the front with a lightning-fast qualifying lap before launching it into. Early on in the race, Stein's ambition is propelled by 2 Porsche engines And with Bill Cheeseburg behind the wheel, you can trust his skill as a technician and driver. Who needs to mistrust a Porsche engine when you can focus on the car's handling and durability? 79 individuals paid the $1,300 admission fee, which is more than only 70 of the 79 vehicles that were scheduled to participate ended up showing up, costing $122,000 today. In addition to the vehicles, 57 drivers would vie for a spot in the 33-car field, with some hopping from one vehicle to another, some only in the hopes of securing a seat, but Allstein's name was on the list. Now that it had aired on the everything was happening in real time, and the clock was ticking down in a very tangible way. On April 16th and 17th, 1966, at Cheeseburg Stein and throughout they drove their almost finished, unpainted automobile to California's Vaca Valley Raceway so that Cheese could do his thing. And to find out if their racing car's performance had been supported by any of their hypotheses, the outcomes were quite inspiringly. The vehicle allegedly hit 140 mph at Via Valley, and this piece from the Oakland Tribune, published on April 2nd, also had quite strong handling qualities. Orinda Indy entry gets last touch quote is the story told in the second half of 1966. Stein is a very busy guy, so if you chance to stop by his Orinda house or run into him on the street, keep it brief. Accomplished a lifelong goal creating a supercar to compete at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Now with little time on his hands, just in time for the Indy 500 in April, when he'll be putting the finishing touches on what he terms the final assembly phase. On the 27th, I will have to install certain safety measures and finish painting the body, which is causing me to be far behind schedule with Stein. He spoke yesterday night from the comfort of his house garage, where the sound of machinery and people scarcely permeated. Created his own take on Stein and Bill Cheeseburg. A 38-year-old veteran from Tucson, who was just honored Indy May 1st, is the day you need to be at Cheeseburg to drive the unique twin-engine, four-wheel drive Porsche. 7 every Memorial Day 500 race since 1957, with a high finish of 10th place in 1958, will. Stein fitted two 2-liter flat-6 Porsche 911 engines into a Novi Special, is the first large-bodied vehicle manufactured by the 1936 to 1938 reigning short-track champion. He designed a vehicle with thinner tires and raced it at the now-defunct East Oakland Mile track. The automobile is in great operating condition, and there is less wind resistance, so we can go faster through the corners. Emphasized that in our last tune-up before departure, Sunday at Vacaville Cheeseburg, we had some very amazing times. On the 1 and a 3-mile track, the vehicle can reach speeds of up to 140 mph. What is its top speed? Quote, I'm not sure I should say this honestly, but I will tell you this, we are not returning for the trip. According to Stein, the automobile needed to be painted before the weekend even came to a close. Confined to a pallet and transported by air to Indianapolis, the window and possibility of towing it had closed. The machine had to be ready to race at the racetrack in a matter of days after leaving the paint booth, but there was a hitch. He believed the vehicle required more power, therefore he stuck with Stein throughout this period. Since these engines are completely new to us, the only significant modification they could achieve would be to swap the camshafts. When supplies of Shore's performance gear ran low, he sent a batch of cameras to be adjusted with instructions to put them up at if more power was needed. The Speedway may be considered. Speaking of power, when the automobile arrived. While waiting for the automobile to be weighed at the airport for shipment, JIT saw that it was on its when he inquired about the weight of the shipping pallet. The man at the scales gave him the answer of 2,500 kg. He then wanted to know how much the prior to the car's arrival, pallet weight got shocking news the pallet had been zeroed out on the scale. Furthermore, compared to most other cars that will be racing in Indianapolis, it weighed 500 to 1,000 pounds more. As soon as the automobile touched down in Indianapolis on May 8th, it was clear that things were going south. No one on the crew knew anything about Gasoline Alley Stein, and none of the racetrack regulars either. Were well known to the general public, and among the whole bunch, Cheeseburg was the only known quantity. Issues with the shifter linkage's insistence on maintaining all transaxles in gear, as well as with maintaining both engines running well without any direct connection between them other than the hydraulic Tom Manning, and others spent days perfecting the art of coordinating the throttle and shifter. Which had seemed satisfactory in Vacaville was now put in doubt at the racetrack, and the responsibility for rectifying this situation was placed on the ITEL said in a recorded interview that the car's original geometry was a nightmare when it came to the shoulders of JIT Speedway, and he squandered days if not weeks of adjustment, disassembly, and shimmying after fixing the suspension, Cheeseburg would be able to race the vehicle at full throttle around the course. The car's handling was fantastic, but it lacked enough power, which was a big issue for Cheeseburg. Powering the vehicle to speeds of up to 7,500 RPM, the small engines were only capable of revving to 9,000 RPM. The automobile was essentially going at a constant 150 miles per hour, which is equivalent to 15 miles per hour. Leading competitors like Mario and Rettiai were 8 minutes behind the 33rd qualifier at the time, Ronnie. As his money dwindled to nothing, Duman Alstein saw one last alternative. He chose to install the system even though his odds of qualifying were dwindling, and it was just halfway through the month. Fitted improvised camshafts to the engine in a rush to increase power and speed. When will this be over? As the work progressed, Bill Cheeseburg started implementing his backup plan, which was P. Cheeseburg. As the Stein-Valvoline Special was in the air, he boarded Norm Demler's Jack Adams aircraft special. What made this automobile unique was its use of a General Electric shaft turbine to power its exquisitely crafted roadster. Wheels weren't the first turbine automobile at Bonneville, and Jack Adams hadn't driven the first one either. In this or any previous Indy 500 ever hosted, the headlines surrounding the aircraft special were among the most ludicrously funny. Now that the new cams were in, Cheeseburg got the vehicle warmed up and hit the track. The effects were catastrophic within a lap or two of when the changed camshafts started around May 16th or 17th. In order for the engines to malfunction, releasing a variety of metals into the common oil tank and then circulate those metals, Alone's dream, came crashing down as he ran over both engines at once, rendering them useless. While it was empty and the 1966 Indy 500 field was not going to be able to accommodate the Stein-Valvoline special focus on the Cheeseburg turbine roadster as it seemed to be doing laps minutes before the Stein Adventure disaster. The outcomes of which made headlines in the narrative is so absurd that it's hard to believe someone could have published it. Adams' entry clocks 230 mph, according to the Memphis Press Scimitar headline from May 18, 1966. According to a quotation by Bill Eber, if we settle all of the issues, the only thing left to decide is which side to pass. Jack will be piloted by Bill Cheeseburg, a 20-year racing veteran hailing from Tucson, Arizona. Only Mario Andretti's jet-powered Adams Aviation Special will be competing in this year's Indianapolis 500. Cheeseburg is aiming to achieve a new qualification record of 166 miles per hour, which has already captivated the racing audience. If we can gather all the loose ends by Saturday, then the first time the vehicle is qualified, it was tested for the first time yesterday on the track, and has a universal electric turbine shaft engine quoted as saying, "How about the turns?" When asked about the vehicle's top speed on a straightaway, he said that getting used to the device would be the only real challenge, and that you'll need to gradually reduce your acceleration as you go. The car's maximum horsepower is 1,250 while going into the corners, but it will only be 900 during the Memorial Day race. That's not all, however, according to Cheeseburg. You also need to tailor the vehicle to the circuit, and that's exactly what we're aiming to do. The main mechanic, Bill Henderson, is now responsible for fitting and oversees an almost 24-hour. The team of Henderson began their work at 8 a.m. in an attempt to prepare the vehicle for the major race. From 3 in the morning until 3:30, each day attempting, we believe we have a solution to the issues of fumes in the cockpit and somewhat excessive heat drifting back. This year, Tickletown's Adams, who is attempting to bring the Indy 500 for the second time, said, "Wonderful chance." Presented by Paul Goldsmith, the trophy went to Memphis last year, but on the last day of the General, it failed to qualify. According to Adams, representatives from Electric and Bell Helicopter have come down here to see how things are going, and they're happy with it. We had to move the accelerator and brakes to make Cheeseburg fit better. Once he gets acclimated to it, we'll be able to sell him the plane. We are seeking improved outcomes from the vehicle, which is not the first jet to use a Watson Roadster chassis, and have taken it to the cockpit. The previous N500 entry produced 340 horsepower, while the current Cheeseburg 2 is at, he said that one of the cars had throttle lag, so you couldn't compare the two. Proceeded to the floorboard while holding it, and there was a lag of 3 to 5 seconds before they achieved maximum power. Stomping on anything gives you full power instantly. However, this unexpected surge of strength produced several issues that at precisely midnight, the Memphis Soul slammed on the gas, and the vehicle accelerated with incredible force. As his head slammed against the roll bar, I recalled that our Beechcraft had a sculpted headrest. Adams said that I roused Jack Wall from his slumber by phoning Twinkletown Airport, which is close to Wallace, Mississippi, and then taking him to Bonanza. At midnight on Monday, he descended to Twinkletown, removed the airplane's headrest, and proceeded to Metropolitan. Took it to the airport, boarded an aircraft to Indianapolis, and the next morning it was on the vehicle. Everything went well. Claims of 230 mph on the back straight indicate that the automobile was probably powerful and accelerated well. Say it reached 260 mph in later years, which is very questionable. Bill Cheeseburg was cited in subsequent years as stating that it reached 275 mph along the back straight. Although the fishtail is entertaining, the automobile itself had its own of issues, according to the Arizona Daily. Cheeseburg still having trouble in Indianapolis May 22nd, 1966 headline in the Star, in order to learn how to use the turbine power of Jack Adams's unique aircraft. The Cheeseburg of Tucson spent the day waiting for practice sessions here. Norm Demler owns the turbine engine, which has the potential to burn, quote, Cheeseburg if we could only find out how to put it to use. Notes that the Tucson driver has been employed by the turbine squad since the twin engine's owner, Al Stein, he was let go by Porsche last week. And according to Cheeseburg, the company is officially out of the competition because of engine problems. His contract with Demler expired yesterday, and he has already stated his intention to seek for a new ride for today's last day of qualifiers. Among the many available vehicles that can compete in the field, but lack drivers like Roger McCluskey, Tucson's other independent driver, who met the qualifications, he spent most of yesterday watching the GC Murphy special and plans to get in a few practice laps today. It's safe to assume that Alstein was devastated when he and the lads packed up and left for California. He was in a precarious financial position and had a lengthy list of creditors clamoring for payment, including the engine folks who had they put a lot of effort and time into the vehicle, if that's even possible. And Bill, first of all, Cheeseburg never obtained a ride to qualify. Therefore, his departure from Indianapolis is the most unfortunate part of everyone's journey. And remain to see the spectacle, having already arranged to go to Milwaukee to participate in the next USAC race with Lloyd Ruby. His Ruby, a racing friend of mine, had a fantastic Indianapolis 500. He qualified for the race in the middle of row 2, using lead lap 65. All the way to 75, then 87 to 132, 133 to 139, and finally, a terrible pit stop. Ruby led more laps than anybody else in the 1966 race, although she was forced to retire early due to a technical issue and lost several laps. With no tangible results to show for it, on June 3rd, Ruby Cheeseburg and a few pals boarded her aircraft at the little they boarded the plane at Speedway Airport, got themselves ready for the short flight to Milwaukee, and then, after a quick 100 feet in the air, climbed into a cornfield. Causing Cheeseburg to sustain injuries, Ruby had 48 stitches for his face, and he mangled his back was so terrible that he didn't get to drive a GT40 at Lawns that year with Ken Miles. We are all aware of the tragic conclusion to that narrative, and it was no different for the passengers. On the other side of the nation, Alstein hid out for months, while Cheeseburg had a really tough month. Despite fixing the engines and taking the vehicle to the season-ending U-turn, he managed to get in one more race. Incident in Phoenix, when he failed to complete the vehicle before the first race date while attempting to construct it. Bill Cheeseburg did it again now. According to some reports, the vehicle did qualify and complete a few laps of the race before withdrawing. But according to all available documents, and from what I can see, they made an effort to get the vehicle onto the field, but it didn't quite make the cut. Start the race in any case, it can be claimed with certainty that this was the second and last race of the both. Alstein and his automobile seem to fade into oblivion as they make their way home in the Stein-Valvoline special. Once again, and its whereabouts remain a mystery. Recently, a number of fragments, including the nose, have been discovered. Bill's vehicle is shown at a California body shop, but the chassis, motors, and everything else has disappeared. While Cheeseburg's tenure in the Indy 500 came to a conclusion in 1968, his career in Scrabble racing would go on until the 1980s. He maintained his successful stock car racing career in Arizona far into the 1980s and is widely recognized as a legend in the industry. In such region, Jit would have large tones, live into his 90s, and be an ardent hot rodder the whole time. Craftsman, his business is still doing strong, and the product he created is almost ubiquitous in our exists in some shape or another. Jit created some of the most jaw-dropping automobiles you've ever laid eyes on, but my own. His favorite, yup, that's his Corvette he got it new, and has had it for almost his whole life before deciding at one point he had the brilliant idea of hot rodding a V12 Jaguar engine straight out of the factory and installing it in the front of the Corvette. Had an air-cooled flat 6 in its trunk, his meticulous work was even praised by, if you're a lover of Corvairs, you have to see this hot rod. It's one of the coolest you'll ever see. Lifelong dreamer wasn't unsuccessful. He was just one of 30 or more automobile owners whose vehicle couldn't keep up with the 1966 Indy 500 at the very least. This is a remarkable tale of a lifelong ambition coming true. Following 1966, the Indy 500 rapidly transformed into a platform where the individual with a concept was overshadowed by the enormous group with a concept, a sizable sum of money, and a plan, etc. It is inherent in expert vehicle racing, but with an emphasis on a wholly novel Kant idea that is built locally and assembled at one's own house. Would the plot have been different if the garage had this wonderful car? It would have been ideal if the vehicle had qualified, but I have my doubts. Thank you for tuning in. Give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more gearhead and vintage racing videos.